The Aztecs were a powerful civilization in central Mexico that rose up around the 14th century and built this insanely sophisticated empire centered in Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. And they had these huge stone temples and canals and floating gardens called chinampas. And they believed in all these gods like Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun who supposedly guided them to their promised land after wandering for years, and they finally settled where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus with a snake in its beak, which is still on the Mexican flag, by the way. And they were fierce warriors and smart politicians who basically turned tribute collection into an art form by dominating neighboring city-states and demanding payment in food textiles, jade feathers, and even humans for sacrifice, which sounds wild today. But for them, was part of a sacred duty to keep the universe in balance and make sure the sun kept rising every day. And speaking of sacrifice, they'd do it on top of these giant pyramids like the Templo Mayor, and sometimes they'd cut out the hearts of captives in public ceremonies, which is both terrifying and fascinating because it was tied to this cosmology, where gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and so humans had to return the favor by offering blood and life. And they also had this insanely accurate calendar system with a 260-day ritual calendar called the Tonalpohualli, and a 365-day solar calendar called the Xiuhpohualli. And their priests could use these to determine lucky and unlucky days and perform rituals to match the rhythm of the cosmos. And even though they didn't have beasts of burden or the wheel in the way we used it for transport, they engineered these causeways and aqueducts and market systems that blew the minds of the Spanish when they arrived. And Cortés the Conquistador was like, whoa, this place is like Venice but bigger and shinier. And even though he only had a few hundred guys, he allied with Aztec enemies like the Tlaxcalans, and eventually took down the empire, thanks to internal divisions, disease like smallpox, and a whole lot of manipulation and betrayal. Especially with the role of Malinche, this indigenous woman who acted as translator and advisor, and is still seen as a controversial figure, because some say she was a traitor and others say she was just surviving and navigating a brutal world the best she could. And after the conquest, Tenochtitlan was destroyed and Mexico City was built on its ruins. But the legacy of the Aztecs lives on in language like Nahuatl words such as chocolate, tomato, and avocado, and in traditions and festivals, and even in murals and political movements, because people are still trying to reclaim and honor that indigenous identity, despite centuries of colonialism and oppression. And honestly, when you look at their art and poetry and philosophy, you see this depth of thought and beauty and reflection on death and time that's super moving. Like there's this line in one of their poems that goes,